Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another Monster Hunter Wilds video. I know I just did one of these literally the other day and I'm sure people are asking for a lot of deep rock content, but don't worry, it's coming. I've just been very much obsessed with Monster Hunter over the past couple of days, so I want to talk about it. And specifically today, I want to talk about Monster Hunter Wilds in terms of how it feels as a sequel compared to the other Monster Hunter games, and also some of the concerns that players have had over it, and just give my initial first thoughts on the game, because Monster Hunter is a series that I love a whole lot. Granted, I haven't actually been into the series for as long as some other people. I only got into the series as back as Monster Hunter World, which was the last mainline installment, so I've only played 2 games up until this point, World and Rise. But even though I have only played 2 mainline games, I have played a lot of them. I think Monster Hunter Rise is in my top 5, I think, most played games on Steam, if I'm not mistaken. It's either in the top 5 or right there outside of it. It's one of the two. But I have put a lot of time into the Monster Hunter franchise, and when Wilds was coming out, I was looking forward to it immensely. And now that I have the chance to play it, I want to kind of talk about it because I have just now reached the 50-hour playtime mark, so I feel like I have at least a good amount to say about Wilds in terms of its performance, in terms of how well it is, and how much it compares to the other Monster Hunter games overall, because a lot of people have mixed opinions about it, and there's one thing in particular that people are concerned about, which I'll get into that in a little bit. But first, talking about the game overall, I think it is a great addition to the Monster Hunter franchise. I think that personally, this is probably the most quality and fun game in the series so far, at least of the ones that I have played. I think the enjoyment factor is very much up there. I think a lot of the different quality of life changes that they've done to the game have made it so much more effective and efficient to play, both for new players as well as for veteran players. I think it's a lot easier for people to get into the franchise now, especially with the way that they handled the onboarding process in this particular game. I think the introductory levels, the beginning of the game, the beginning of the story help to bring new players in phenomenally. And then going into the pros that I personally feel about this game, and then I'll talk more about the things that I think could be a little bit better and probably what a lot of people are talking about. First, I think that the weapon design for this game is phenomenal. I think that the weapons are probably one of the hardest things for Monster Hunter to handle in a good way, not necessarily because it's difficult, but because people have such a good identity around the weapons that they want to play, that if you change too much of them or you do a big shift in how a particular weapon plays, chances are people aren't going to like that. And for example, in the case of Monster Hunter Wilds, when the beta was out a while ago, they had changed a lot of factors about the Kinseg Glaive, which in World and Rise were basically flying weapons. Like, the Kinseg Glaive was basically a weapon that you could essentially just fly in the air, because you could vault up and then you could bounce off of the monster. It was a mounting powerhouse of a weapon. You could mount the monster very easily and deal damage that way. But then in the beta, in the early test builds, they were like, we're going to take away the vaulting and the mid-air jumps that you could do. And everyone was like, why? That's literally the best part about the Kinseg Glaive. So then once the game finally came out and they had later builds, they added it back in. So weapon identity is very important for a lot of people, and I think that in terms of Wilds, they handled it very well. Personally, I am a Switch Axe main. You're going to see that in the background gameplay, and I think that they handled the Switch Axe very well in this particular game. I think that the combos that they have are phenomenal. I think that the way that they handled both axe and sword mode are great, and even in the other weapons that I've dabbled with, the lance, the longsword, the bow, the dual blades, the sword and shield, they all feel phenomenal. So I think weapon-wise, they have really hit the nail on the head, at least with this particular game. And combat overall, I feel as though that they've really nailed in terms of ease of use as well as effectiveness. I know some people are a little bit torn on the focus mode, which is where you can actually sort of zoom in and aim your character. I personally think it's a great thing because it allows you to just have a lot more control over your character. The control still feels clunky, but not nearly as clunky as it was in previous Monster Hunter games. You still have to be mindful of enemy positioning. You still have to be mindful about where you are in terms of where a monster attacked, but it just makes it so that way you don't have to be so worried about repositioning and then just not being able to hit the monster because your character's facing away from them. It basically just allows you to constantly keep your attention or your focus on the monster. Another pro for this game is probably just the environments. I think the environments and the way that they handled the open world world was very well done. The fact that there is not only a day-night cycle, but there is also different temperament and seasons, essentially. You have the plentiful season where there's just tons of stuff all over the place. You have the fallow season, which is there's not a whole lot of stuff, or there might be more hazards, but not as much plants that you can gather. And then there's the inclemency period where, depending on what particular area you're in, you're going to have some serious weather problems. If you're in the plains, you're going to have sandstorms and lightning storms. If you're in the forest, you're going to have a massive typhoon of a storm going on. If you're in the ice area, there's going to be blizzards and you're not going to be able to see anything. And a lot of those things really play into the way that you hunt, and I really like the way that they handled it. Also, just hunting things in the open world is so much easier because, yes, you can start hunts in the traditional way by going to your handler Alma and then posting the quest, or you can just go to the map and just see what's around and then just make a hunt quest from the map itself, which is phenomenal and very well done. And then just a lot of the quality of life stuff that they changed really helped make the game feel a lot better. The secret is a great addition. Being able to move around, even though sometimes it can be a little bit finicky with trying to get it to navigate properly, the fact that you have that is just a great tool. The fact that you can gather materials from range using your slinger is a very good thing because it just makes it so that way you don't have to spend nearly as much time grinding the tedious resources. And then the last thing I would probably say is the monsters that are in the game are all very well designed. I like pretty much everything that we have. There's only a couple monsters that I really am like, what in the world kind of design is this? But for the most part, all of the monsters, the big monsters, the apex predators, and even the title monster Arkveld is very well designed, and I like the concept behind all of them. That's pretty much something you're never gonna have a bad experience with when it comes to Monster Hunter. Very rarely do they miss the ball on several monsters. Some of them might be reskins, or some of them might act very similar, but for the most part, they're all very well done. And there's probably a lot more that I could say, but I do kind of want to go into the more controversial cons that I feel as though the game could be a little bit better in. Obviously, talking about the big elephant in the room is performance. If anybody's been following Monster Hunter for a while, or at least been following people talking about it since it came out, you know that performance is sketchy for some people. At least in my experience, I have not had a hard time running this game, but I'm also running the game with a mixture of medium and high settings. I'm not playing things on ultra or like maxed out graphics. So the game could look a little bit better, at least in my particular circumstances, but I don't want to risk it. And as a little quick story, a friend of mine who was trying to play this game, literally trying to play this game, broke his PC and he had to get a entirely new one just in order to play this game. Granted, his computer was a little bit older, so it was probably time for him to upgrade anyway, but the fact of the matter is that this is definitely not a game that is meant for lower end PCs. If you're playing on console, it's not going to be a big deal. You don't have to worry about that at all, but at least for PC, you do have to be a little bit more careful, and understandably, I can see why people would have a bit of a strong hesitation in regards to the performance, especially with how well World and Rise did in terms of performance. Both of those games look really, really good even today, and I'm sure they are going to put some kind of patches out at some point in time to help with improvement and stability. And at least this is just probably my opinion, but just because a game does not look hyper realistic, the fact that it runs good and the fact that it still does look very nice, to me, is enough to kind of enjoy it. But I know for some people that might not be the case. One thing that a lot of people are talking about, and that I've heard a lot of talk through the grapevine, is that this game is very easy. The fact that this game is incredibly easy compared to a lot of other Monster Hunter games out there. And I would kind of agree with that. I do think that this game is very easy compared to World and Rise. Now, you kind of have to be a little bit more careful with talking about that, because I could be saying that just in the sense that I've gotten a lot better at the game. I'm using a weapon that I'm very comfortable with. I used the switch axe throughout my entire playthrough of the main story, which is a weapon that I know very well, and it was pretty easy for me to get used to the new stuff that they added in for it. So a lot of that you could chalk up to the fact that people are just better at the game now, but I think that even for newer players, it's still a very easy game. I have another friend of mine who isn't the biggest Monster Hunter player in the world. He played a little bit of World pretty much post Iceborne, when they could power you up and going through the main story was really easy. And he played a little bit of Rise. He didn't play a whole lot of it. But when he played through this, he essentially just kept upgrading his weapon and didn't really upgrade any of his armor throughout the course of the entire game, and he really didn't have any trouble with it. And keep in mind, again, this is a guy who does not really play a whole lot of Monster Hunter, so the fact that he was able to get through it without really any issue whatsoever is kind of telling. And I think the reason why people are saying this is because there are a lot of ways in which the game is significantly easier, both in the early and late game. Number one is the fact that there are not a lot of monsters in this game. There's, I think, only only a little bit over 20 some monsters on launch right now, which is a lot lower than World and Rise came out with. Pretty sure they were in the 30s, if not even the 40s in terms of monsters that were out, at least on release. And I'm not counting like slight variations like, oh, this is this monster and then the tempered version, like it's the same thing. So the fact that there are not a whole lot of monsters is a little bit disappointing, and also kind of lends to the fact that it's very easy because the story itself is just not necessarily that long, because there's not a whole lot of things that you gotta fight. And some of the monsters that you do fight don't really show up until you get past the main story and then get into the post-story stuff. So in that sense, it makes it so that way it does feel very short. And also the ways that we have to fight the monster make it significantly easier. Again, going back to the focus mode, it does help a lot with keeping track of the monster, but it also interacts with a new system that again is kind of controversial to some people, which is the wound system. The wound system is a brand new thing that was added in with Monster Hunter Wilds that was kind of sort of a thing in World, but in a bit of a different way. Basically, the way that it works is when you hit a monster in the same spot enough times, it creates a wound, which if you're looking at the monster in focus mode, you will see it glow. It is a big red splotch that is indicating that it is a weak point. And the way that weak points work is if you deal a lot of damage to said weak point, that weak point will then break, deal a lot of damage to the monster, usually stagger it, and also give you a material as a reward. Now, every single weapon in the game also has an attack that you can do while in focus mode that if you just hit the monster or if you whiff, it just does a quick attack and it's a very long animation. But if you connect with a wound with that particular attack, you'll do this big animation, you'll do a lot of damage. In the case of the switch axe, which you'll probably see a lot in the background gameplay, I'll be swinging back and forth and then do like a flip or a stab or something. You do a lot of damage and you break said wound. Now, the thing is about this particular system is wounds pop up very often, and there are skills that make them pop up even more often. And there are also skills that you can get for your armor that make it so that way dealing damage to wounds does more damage. It heals you, whatever the case may be. So a lot of people are saying that the wound system makes taking out tough monsters very easy. Even things like tempered apex predators, which you'll see in the background gameplay. Basically everything you're going to see in the background gameplay for this video is me fighting either an apex predator or a tempered version. And these are supposed to be like the toughest of the toughest enemies in the game. And for the most part, you'll see I really don't have a whole lot of trouble fighting them. Again, because the wounds are popping up all the time. And also on that point, if you see any blue wounds on the enemies behind me, not anything special. That just means it's a tempered wound, which is just a wound on a tempered monster. But the wound system is very fun because it definitely helps with that power fantasy of you feeling very strong, but it does definitely make the monsters significantly easier to take out because you're able to do a lot of damage very quickly in very high amounts. And like I said, you're able to stagger or in some cases even just knock down the monster with every wound destroyed, unless they're in some sort of attack where they can't be interrupted, in which case it won't do it. But for the most part, every time you take out a wound, the monster will at least be staggered or completely knocked down, which you'll be able to take advantage of. That also makes basically hunting anything significantly faster because so long as you just prioritize the wounds, which you're naturally going to want to do, you can go through hunts much easier. Another factor that I think is contributing to the ease of use for this particular game that's making it a little bit too easy is something that you wouldn't necessarily expect, and that's the AI. And not the AI of the monster, it's the AI of your companions. Basically, if you are in a hunt and you open up the lobby, send up an SOS flare to open up to other players, what will happen is you will get AI controlled hunters that will join your lobby that will fill the gap until more players join. You'll get Olivia, you'll get Alessa, and you'll get Rosso. I always forget how to pronounce his name, but those three are your AI controlled hunters, and they will join the lobby and basically hold the spots until real people join. And they are good. The AI for these hunters and even your Palico is really good. It's better than it was in the last couple of Monster Hunter games. They are able to basically completely hold their own even if you're not there. There was a hunt that I did yesterday where I literally started the hunt, called for reinforcements, they joined, and then I had to go away to take care of something. So I kind of just went back to camp and just hoped and prayed that they were still there when I got back. And I was only gone for like maybe 5, not even 10 minutes. And when I came back, the monster that I was hunting was limping because the AI controlled hunters were just able to take it out that quickly. So you really don't even need to do much in this particular game. You can actually just call the AI controlled hunters and they can do most of the heavy lifting for you. And if they go down, it doesn't count towards your lives or anything like that. I don't actually even think they can go down. I think their health goes to 0 and they take a minute to rest and then they come back, but it doesn't count towards your rewards or anything like that. So it's incredibly easy just to take out monsters very easily because all you have to do is just rely on them, which is great for solo players, but it also means that, again, you're not gonna really have to struggle with anything. And then also, at least in my experience, comparing this to the other Monster Hunter games, and this might just be because we don't have a lot of the post-game content, the title updates, or the eventual expansion that we're going to get that's going to really flesh out a lot more of the build crafting, but I feel like it's way easier to get some of the high-end stuff, and especially a lot of the decorations and the jewels that you can get to make yourself stronger. Basically, to briefly go over it, once you get to the end game, along with your armor, you get a jewel system that you get these gems that give you different skills that allow you to add or remove different skills from your armor, and that's basically where a lot of the build crafting comes into play. And in this game, it's really easy, at least in my experience, to get them. I haven't really gone through a whole lot, and I've gotten a lot of gems that I can use very well. And even some of the top tier weapons, like the Ardian weapons, which are weapons that you can craft using materials that you get from tempered monsters, are all really powerful, and the fact that you can custom make them to do whatever you want just means that you can very easily make weapons to handle just about any situation. So the grind is not nearly as intense as it was in the previous games, which is good in some regards because you don't want to be fighting the same monster 47 times just because it won't drop that one particular material you need. But at the same time, it kind of makes it feel like you don't have a whole lot to do. Me personally, I'm at the point right now where I don't really have much else to do in this game at the current moment. I've gotten every weapon that I want. I've gotten pretty much all of the types of gear that I want. I don't have like a 10 out of 10 super hyper meta build or anything like that, but the build that I have is really good for everything that I have acquired. And you can see kind of in the background gameplay, I'm not really struggling against these tempered monsters. They really are not too difficult, and I don't have a prime build set up. I'm just using what I have, and it still works very well. That kind of shows you kind of just how easy it is, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially for new players, because it allows them to jump into it. And I think a lot of these issues will be resolved once the eventual expansion comes out for this game, because that's kind of the theme for every Monster Hunter game, is we get the game, it's good, it gives us a good amount of story, it gives us a lot that we can do, and then the expansion comes out, which basically just doubles the size of the game. You know, we get master rank, we get a bunch of new monsters, we get a bunch of new gear, and it gives us a ton of stuff that we can do. All in all, I kind of wanted this video to be a first impressions of and thoughts about Monster Hunter, at least from my perspective, which again, keep in mind, this is all just my perspective. If you disagree with me in any way, shape, or form, that's totally okay. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. But I think it's important to talk about the ways that Monster Hunter could be better, because this is probably one of my favorite franchises in existence at this point. It is just a very fun franchise that to me holds a special place in my heart, because this was one of the first games that I really got to play with a lot of my friends. And the experiences of fighting some of these powerful monsters just really is special, and I want it to succeed, and I want more players to get into it. But I do think it's important to mention and bring up its shortcomings, mention how it could be a bit better, mention the kind of ways that it falls short a little bit, to see if that way players can understand what they're getting into. Again, I don't think that this game is bad under any circumstances. I think that this is still a phenomenal addition to the Monster Hunter series. I do think that it could be better in a couple of different ways, but at the end of the day, that's just my opinion. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say. If you guys are loving Monster Hunter, let me know down in the comments. If you guys want to see more Monster Hunter stuff, let me know as well. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing today, as it really helps me out and lets me do more stuff. Stay strong, hunters. I will see you in the next video.